Today's guest is simply one of the most successful musicians that rock has created. Def Leppard's Joe Elliott. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm very well. I'm very happy. We're moving into kind of work mode again. You know, we just had a couple of months off. And we're getting ready for Download and the O2 Arena in Dublin, and then 40-odd shows through the States with Poison and Cheap Trick. We love those guys.
Were you a serious record buyer as a kid?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. When I was like 11, 12 years old, I think dinner money back then was 60p. It's like 50. There's 12 pence a day or something like that.
Oh, that was your week's dinner money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And I used to go to the fish and chip shop and just get a bag of scraps instead of, food.
Back in the days when you could get scraps.
Yeah, and they would just throw in a few chips, and I was obviously a very spotty teenager, and that's what I would do for dinner and save my pocket money, or my dinner money rather, and buy a single, which happened to be 60p as well at the time. So every week I would buy at least one 7-inch. And if I was, if there was nothing that I particularly wanted that week, then the X jukebox, the ones where they used to pop the middles out.
Yeah, you have to get the middle.
And they would never be, they'd always wow left to right when you put them on the turntable. And buy a couple of those instead. So I was always, very fortunate that at least once a week I had my, an A and a B side of a single to play. And, I started off with things like Getting On, T-Rex, and then going through Metal Guru and Telegram Sam and Bowie with Starman, John I'm Only Dancing. It was all the kind of British glam rock stuff: Slade, Sweet, Bowie, Bolan, Mott the Hoople, Roxy Music.
It's interesting with the T-Rex thing. What is it about T-Rex specifically?
They were the first band that were my band. When I grew up in Sheffield, I grew up in an area called Broom Hill, and there was only two of us my age, and everybody else is like 4 years older than me, which is not a big deal when you're my age now. I can hang out with somebody that's 53 or 45, and I feel comfortable with them. But when you're 11 and they're 15, they're just like, they're adults in comparison. Yeah. And so all my friends, and as much as I hung out with all these guys, they were all into bands like Tull and Yes and King Crimson. And as much as I was kind of into it because it was cool to be hanging out with older people, it wasn't really my music. And then the first time I saw T-Rex doing Hot Love, I think it was, or Ride a White Swan on Top of the Pops, I was just entranced, and same thing when I saw Bowie doing Starman, which, strangely enough, I've read many times, was the moment that Morrissey, I think Mark Almond and Adam Ant all went, this is it, I want to be a rock star. And
multi-epiphany moment.
Yeah, so you can get four further apart people, all getting into the business for the same reasons.
You've described briefly your area in Broom Hill in Sheffield. What was the childhood like? Was it a musical family?
Yes, it was. I had a very ordinary upbringing. I was an only child. We used to play soccer in the car park of Mac Market, which was the local supermarket. So the ball would always fly over the top down onto the street, like 60, 70 feet below. You have to run down and fetch it, and then you get bored, and then you go home and put Radio Luxembourg on. My family was pretty musical. My mum bought an acoustic guitar at the age of about 35, 36 she was, and taught herself to play. She got it from Grattan's catalogue for probably about 20p a week.
Wonderful.
My father was a bit of a Larry Adler. He loved the mouth organ.
Oh, bro.
He had that, and he made a little bongo out of an old drain pipe and a leather chamois cloth and an O-ring, tightened it round the thing, and I had a bongo because, Mickey Finn had a bongo in T-Rex, so it was okay. I couldn't play guitar. My mother taught herself to play Pete Seeger, Waylon Jennings, all these kind of American, Americana folk, if you like.
Yeah, that was not usual stuff, really, was it? That was interesting.
No, and she had a great voice. She sounded like Joan Baez. And
brilliant.
So she could do The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. I couldn't tell the difference,
Wow.
At the age of 11 or 12. Actually, no, I was about 8, I think, when she bought the guitar. But I couldn't play. And then I decided I wanted one. And, rightfully so, my father said, well, you can have one when you can play it. So, of course, I instantly had my mother teach me 3 chords. And once I got my head around, she'll be coming around the mountains. There was no stopping me. I wrote my first song when I was 8 and a half. And I even tried to write a rock opera when I was about 12 about
brilliant.
Killing somebody in an acid bath. I mean, it's tragic. It wasn't Tommy, put it that way. And but you know, we had these Friday night sessions where we'd sit around and we'd play stuff, and we'd even try and attempt to write stuff. You know, so it was always in our blood, even though it was very, you know, back room, if you like. There was no attempt for anybody to be professional. But at the end of the day, when I decided this is what I wanted to do, and trust me, I actually did tell my careers officer I wanted to be a rock star.
At what age was that? About 15?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the response I got. But my parents were always very supportive, and their whole theory of it was like, well, look, you know, give it a go. If it doesn't work out, you can always get another job.
You've mentioned already, you're a bit of a as I understand, you're a multi-instrumentalist. I mean, you guitar, you play keyboards. What is it that led you to singing?
Last resort. Seriously, I mean, it was.
Were you no good at the other stuff?
Well, I've only learnt to play all the other things pretty much since I joined the band.
Okay.
The first gig I ever played was as a drummer. I played a rhythm guitar for one gig at the Working Men's Club somewhere in Sheffield when I was about 16. I played drums for a band called Jump, who'd lost their drummer to a grape-picking trip into France.
That so often happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I stood in because I could just about hold it together on songs like Poison Ivy and Johnny Be Good.
Yeah.
I've got a lot better at it over the years, and I learned to play piano at Startling Studios, which was actually Tittenhurst Park, which was John Lennon's house. You know, you've probably seen the Imagine video where he's in the white room with the white piano, and him and Yoko are doing But that room, when we were there, had a piano, but it also had a pool table. And the day we moved in, Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show were moving out, and my claim to fame that night was I beat the guy with the patch on his eye. But there was a piano, and I literally started on the C note and worked my way through learning how to just do the scales of things like Oh You Pretty Things and All the Young Dudes, where you just go down the scale from C. And just worked and worked and worked at it. But when I first started singing, it was literally a case of what else, you know, why not? You know, I missed my bus home from the factory I was working in.
I was going to ask you about this. Is this true? Because this is one of those legends that you think that can't be true.
You've seen the movie Sliding Doors where, you know, what if? And I missed the bus for whatever reasons. It came early, I got there too late. And I didn't even walk the regular route home. I walked a odd route home. And that, by doing that, I bumped into Pete Willis, who was, you know, the original guitarist in Def Leppard. And I didn't know him that well, but I knew he played guitar through a friend of mine that lived, you know, pretty close. And I just said to him, you know, hey, what you doing? You know, do you fancy getting a band together? Because I'd just been out and bought this Les Paul copy from some second-hand junk store on London Road in Sheffield. Yeah. And I fancied myself as at least a rhythm guitar player. And Pete said, well, not really. I've kind of got a band together. We're looking for a singer, though. And I just blurted out, I'll do it.
Oh, bro.
And I'd been in the band 6 weeks before I even sang because we had to save money up to buy a microphone.
Gave you time to practice.
Yeah, we were one of those weird bands that just became a band. We weren't musicians. You too have said a very similar thing. They were just a bunch of kids at this Mount Carmel school in Dublin. They just, you know, Larry put an advert in and these guys just drifted together and they couldn't play at all when they first got together. I couldn't sing. I mean, I used to sing in the choir, but then when my voice broke, it totally changed, you know. Yeah. But I got used to it, and it just developed my own style, I suppose, which I think is much more important. You know, there's a lot of generic singers out there where you can't tell them apart, but good or bad, David Johansen, Ozzy Osbourne, you can recognize, you can stick their vocals over a Black Sabbath track or a New York Dolls track or the London Philharmonic, and you'd instantly go, that's Ozzy or that's David Johansen. Yeah. And I think that's, you know, like the Dylan thing or Ian Hunter, it's much more important to be recognizable than to be absolutely stunningly brilliant.
You mentioned Ian Hunter a couple of times. I know the last time we spoke to you was at the Classic Rock Awards, where you actually, were involved with the Mick Ronson Award that came around. Yeah. So what's Ian Hunter for you?
I first got introduced to Mott the Hoople through Radio Luxembourg. It could have been Tony Prince or any of those guys that were DJing on Luxembourg at the time. They'd play things that were just never going to get played on Radio 1, unless maybe John Peel touched them. And I remembered Record of the Week 71 was a track called Downtown, which was a song that they covered. I think it was written by Danny Whitten, who used to be with Neil Young. And I really dug it because they'd play it every hour. So I just got familiar with it. And I was 11, 12 years old. And it's just another song in my little arsenal of songs that I had in my head, maybe 12 or 13 of them by then.
Yeah.
And then I came across these compilation albums that Island used to put out and they started off with Nice Enough to Eat. Then there was LP, which had a big P on the cover, and it was spelled E-L-P-E-A.
Brill.
And then they had an album called Bumpers, and they were just sampler albums, and there'd be a track by Free, a track by Tull, Cat Stevens, Jimmy Cliff, etc., etc. And Mott the Hoople were on these compilations. And there was a song called Thunderbuck Ram on one of them, and there was a great song on LP called Original Mixed Up Kid, which was a kind of real, like, laid-back acoustic thing. And I just thought it was really good. I was never a Dylan fan, but I loved what Hunter did as a kind of a Dylan clone, if you like, or copyist, or influenced by, at least. He'll hit me when he hears this.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. Yeah, come on, come on.
You've talked about the early beginnings of the band that became Def Leppard. You were quite... I get the impression you must have been quite a go-ahead bunch of youngsters, bearing in mind you recorded your own EP to start with, you sort of self-financed. You were kind of pushing all the time to live the dream, which you decided when you said around 15 that you were going to be a rock star. What was the drive? Was that you driving it, or was that everyone collectively?
It was all of us, but there's always a captain, I suppose. And, you know, I was mouthy and arrogant and loud and confident, and there were no boundaries for me. To me, it was a springboard for anything other than what I was destined to become. Sheffield in the 70s was dying. It's a fantastic place now, but at the time, every factory had broken windows. I mean, it really did look like the beginning of the Full Monty. It was, you know, it was not a pleasant place. And even when the sun shone, it still looked overcast, you know.
I know what you mean.
And I just couldn't wait to get out. And I used to work in a factory, and you'd be clocking in and clocking out. And I was 15 when I started there. And I was thinking, God, am I going to do this for another 50 years? You know, and I so knew I wasn't going to, but it was the only incentive you needed to just anything to get out of this situation. So you'd push and push and push, and I used to phone pubs, can we play your pub, because they used to have bands on, and then the scene started to die, and it was really difficult getting bookings because the disco thing was really kicking in, and nobody wanted to see live bands in the late 70s.
Yeah.
But we worked and worked and worked, and we were, you know, the first gig we did, we got paid £5 out of a teacher's pocket. The next gig we did, we got paid £3. The third gig we played, we didn't get paid at all.
Okay, I can.
It was a showcase, and the fourth gig cost us 35 because we had to rent a van for £50, and we only got paid like 15.
Okay.
So it's like, this is going wrong. At the time we were in Sheffield, there was a band from Grantham based in Sheffield called the Next Band. And they'd been to this studio in Hull called Fairview Studios and made their own EP. Yeah. And we got to know these guys. They used to play what was called the Wapentake back then, which is like this rock pub that had put some tables together to make a stage, and they'd have little bands on. Yeah. So we watched them a few times. We got a booking down there. They came down to see us. We got to know each other. I picked their brains as to how they got the money together. And basically, I borrowed the money off my father, who emptied our bank account, really. You know, he lent us £150. We went to Fairview Studios for the weekend, and between the bed and breakfast and the studio costs, we came out of there with a finished mix of 3 songs with £1.50 change.
Brilliant.
Which we spent sharing on a bag of fish and chips. I remember eating them coming back over the Humber Bridge, you know.
How wonderful.
And we got the what became the Def Leppard EP, and somebody was really looking over us that day, because I listen to it now occasionally and I think, how the hell did this turn out so well? Because we've done recordings since that aren't as good, you know, and it just really worked. We just showcased as varied a cross-cut of the music that we were writing as we could. There was a kind of a pop rock song called Ride Into the Sun. There was a full-on rock thing with Get Your Rocks Off. And then there was the epic 6-minute thing that sounded like a cross between Rush and Thin Lizzy, called Overture, which was the entire side 2 of this 33 1/3 7-inch vinyl, which we had pressed up down in Cambridge, and we had covers made, and me and my mum glued them together. We sold them locally through the Virgin shop and an independent store called Revolution Records. But coincidentally, John Peel came to do a DJ spot at Sheffield Uni, and I kind of blagged my way in, and I jumped up on stage with it and said, play this. And he said, I don't know what it is, but write your phone number on the sleeve. And leave it with me. And he phoned me the next day and he says, I've played it, I like it, it's going on the show tonight.
Unbelievable.
So of course I was ringing everybody around going, John Peel's going to play the EP. Consequently, he actually played a track every night, Monday to Friday that week. The two of the songs obviously got repeated, but Monday to Friday. And then that really started the ball rolling, nationally. We started picking up fans around the Sheffield area, but then we had people phoning in, and I managed to get Sounds to put a little ad in saying, if you want to buy this thing, here's the address to send it to. And these EPs were just flying out the door. We actually couldn't glue enough covers together quick enough, And you know what? It's kind of full circle, because now we're free agents. I won't be gluing the sleeves together, but we'll be making our own independent records from now on.
It has come full circle, doesn't it?
It's the most, it's just a liberating feeling, because those early days were so full of excitement. Because any mistakes you couldn't point the finger at people except yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that keeps you on your toes, and I think it's real important that bands do that.
When the success came, and it was the usual overnight success, it had taken you about 10 years to get there, but it was huge. It was you were probably, with Bon Jovi, one of the only global rock bands that were kicking about at the time, and you did so well, and still have some amazing awards. I was reading some of the album sales figures that you made, which have got you some of the very rare awards. You're in good company with players like the Beatles and Pink Floyd on certain records, aren't you? And I'm just wondering, at that time, we spoke with Phil Collin about this when he came in. His point was, when you're in the middle of a maelstrom, as you are there, with that fame and everything, and the success around you, you almost don't notice it. I wonder if it was the same for you.
It is for everybody, I think. It's the comparison of the eye of the hurricane, which is dead calm, but everything around is spinning around at God knows how many miles an hour. That's pretty much what it was like, and a lot of it was of our own making. We didn't really go in for that kind of rock star thing that you might read about in Motley Crue's The Dirt book, for example.
Yes.
I mean, of course we did, here and there there'd be the odd woman and there'd be the odd too many drinks and all this kind of stuff, but we kind of got over that pretty quickly. There was some fantastic crazy times, and with the success of Pyromania in '83, that was specifically America and Canada. But when Hysteria came out, which was a good 4 years later, England and Europe and the rest of the world just seemed primed for it. The fact that we'd done Donington the year before kind of let everybody know that Rick had successfully come back from his accident, and we played a couple of new songs, but we didn't want to let too much out. A year later, when Hysteria got released, it followed the success of Animal, which came out before the album, so obviously singles always have a better chart potential if there's no album to buy. And we'd had a top 10 single with Animal, which really did establish us in Britain. And when the album came out, it went straight to number one. And considering that we hadn't had I think the previous charting album we'd had in Britain was On Through the Night in 1980, which got to number 20 or something. So, like you say, it was 10 years since we'd formed before we had our first hit. And I think it's like, somebody once told me, if you get a suntan in 3 days, it'll peel off in 3 days.
Yeah.
If you take 3 or 4 weeks to get one, you'll have it all year. And I kind of compare that to the success that we had. The fact that it took so long to achieve, it's kind of stuck around for a while.
Absolutely. And but I'd just like to ask you about Hysteria, because it sounds like it was a very difficult record to make. Now, if you not including what happened to Rick, but also the fact that you hadn't got Mutt Lange with you initially, and you had to throw quite a lot of material away, I think, when he came back. Did that make it, for such a successful album? It sounds like it was a really difficult one to make.
It was, and I think you'll find that most successful records were. There's the odd one sneaks through. You know? I'm thinking that maybe the first Van Halen record was easy to do, but I know that Tom Scholz was pulling teeth trying to get the first Boston album done, and I dare say the Beatles struggled a lot with things like Sgt. Pepper and the White Album. We went through a different struggle. In the 80s, there were things that you just did that you didn't have the opportunity to do or the necessity to do in the 60s or the 70s. So because we had all this technology available to us, we wanted to see what it did. It was like being sat in the cockpit of a plane and going, what does this button do?
Fantastic.
We saw all these great toys that other kind of acts were using, whether it be Trevor Horn with Frankie Goes to Hollywood, or with Grace Jones, or with any of the acts that he was working with. But when it came to making Hysteria, we started writing with Mutt and piecing some songs together, but then he bowed out of the recording because of exhaustion, and we went in the studio with Jim Steinman, who actually just wanted us to do what all the other bands were doing, which is record it live.
Yeah.
And we were so anti doing that it just wasn't. We were never going to meet in the middle, so we had to part company with him. When we started working with Nigel Green, who worked with us on the previous albums we'd done with Mutt, we were getting an okay result. You know, we were making Pyromania 2.
Yeah.
And had that album come out in 1985, we may have got away with it. But by the time Mutt kind of felt he was okay to come back in and he listened to what we were doing, he actually said, it's okay, but is okay good enough? And we all looked at each other and went, not really, no. And he said, look, let's just revamp this a little bit. And he was very clever. He didn't say scrap it and go back to, you know, what we did, we'd replace things a bit at a time. So we'd redo a vocal and then he'd say, let's redo that guitar part.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the week, you realise you'd actually had scrapped it, but you'd scrapped it in stages, which is less painful psychologically at least.
Sure.
And then we started writing some more material because we just got that enthusiasm back, you know. And the album finally... The album that you hear took maybe about a year and a bit to make, which is, by these standards, by today's standards, is nothing. But we kind of scrapped about 18 months worth of work, which was very expensive. It's a good job we did sell 18 million copies, really.
I think you probably made a few quid back. I'd like to take a track from that because it is so loved still. It's such a popular choice from so many people. One track from there?
Yeah, I think let's just go with the first single. I'll never forget the first time that I bumped into Adam Clayton and he said, I just heard your new single, it's fantastic. And I thought, wow, that's praise enough from somebody new too, so let's go with Animal.